Hey everybody, my name is Justin Meyer, and this is a video that's going to be extracted from the CanJS meetups that I've been doing lately, where I'm going to build TodoMVC with CanJS 2.0. For those who don't know, TodoMVC is an application specification where all the different libraries, including CanJS, have written their version of this application. This allows everyone to compare how each library is used to build TodoMVC's basic functionality. And apologies for this video. I'm going to try to do it in one cut, so it's going to have ums and uns and probably some awkward pauses, but bear with me, there's a lot of useful information. So real quick, let's go through what TodoMVC's functionality is before we build it. You can see here I can add to-dos. I can mark a to-do as completed, and you'll see there's dynamic behavior down here as I toggle the completed state of a to-do. I can remove a to-do. I can see active, completed, and all to-dos. I can edit a to-do, and I can clear completed to-dos. So it's a pretty basic application. We're going to build it with a lot of Can components. We'll actually split up the functionality in two parts. We're going to build a component that handles lists and a component that handles, did I say two parts? A component that handles three parts. A component that handles lists, a component that allows you to create a to-do, and another component that puts them together, handles routing, and just kind of other things. So let's start building it. I've been provided by some hypothetical designer a static HTML page that just has no JavaScript functionality hooked up. You can see that HTML page here. You'll see I have my H1 to-dos, an input that allows me to create to-dos, which is this input here, a list of to-dos, and each to-do is an LI. And you'll notice that the designer has a completed class on this LI, which is why it's marked as completed, and an editing class on this LI, which is the editing state. You can see within each LI there's a view div that gets shown when the to-do is not in the editing state, with a checkbox to toggle the completed state, the title of the to-do, the name of the to-do, and a button to destroy it. And then when it's in the editing state, with this class name here, it instead shows this edit input, which allows you to edit the name. And finally, in the footer, there's the number of items left and some links to toggle which to-dos you're showing and a clear completed. So I tend to like getting the first thing done, just something working right away. So what I'm going to do is just create a list of to-dos and just a static list of to-dos and render them in a template and kind of replace these hard-coded HTML to-dos with kind of hard-coded JavaScript to-dos. The first step, of course, is getting CanJS and jQuery in my page. So I'm going to first go to jQuery and download, use jQuery 1.10 from their CDN. Grab this guy, and I'm going to stick that in my head element, and I'm also going to go to CanJS, go to its download page, and use the CanJS's CDN. I'm going to put a script tag for that too. Close that script tag. And then I'm going to make sure this works by going to my page, refreshing, and typing in can, making sure CanJS is there. So now we have CanJS and jQuery on the page. I'm going to create a static list of to-dos by creating a new can list. I'm going to put some space here. Do var to-dos as a new can list, and this makes observable arrays can list. So I'll pass my array here, and I'm going to give it a list of to-dos. So I'll give a to-do with each to-do has a name. This will be walk the dog, and a completed state, whether it's complete or not, and this will just be true. I've walked the dog today. Name, mow the lawn. So I have not completed this, and I'll have name learn CanJS. This will be completed. False. So this list of to-dos I want to render into kind of my page. What I'm really going to do is I'm just going to take this whole content that the designer gave us and put it into a template and just render that template with the list of to-dos. So to put this in a template, I can create templates a lot of ways in CanJS, but if I want, I want everything in this one page here, I'm going to make a script tag that's type text mustache and give it an ID of app template. I'll add my script tag. And I want to render that template. To render that template, I can call CanView, pass it the ID of the template we just created, so app template, and pass it the data I want available in that template. I'm going to say I want it to have available to-dos. And this is going to render the template and return it as a document fragment. A document fragment you can think of as just a lightweight container of elements that can be rapidly inserted into the page. So we need to insert this rendered template in the page. I'll just create a div that's just has an app ID that I can put this rendered fragment inside of it. So I'm going to do let me hide that. There we go. I'm going to do app, and I'm going to update its HTML with jQuery to the content of the fragment. So now having done this, I'm just going to make sure it's working. I should just refresh and basically get the exact same thing. But now it's the rendered template. It just still has everything hard-coded in it. To change that, we need to use to-dos in the template. So I'm going to replace all these LIs here with a kind of a single LI section that is rendered for each to-do. So I'm going to use Mustache's each helper. I'm going to go through each to-dos and render this section. So pound here, if you have a pound and slash, that kind of defines a section in a mustache template. And this is a helper. This is the each helper. And it's kind of past this section, and what each does is, given some list here, calls this section for each item in that list. So if I refresh my page, it'll just say do the dishes 3 times because that's just the hard-coded hard-coded text inside this label. I want to instead have that be the name of the to-do, and because this section is rendered with each item in the to-do, I just write name inside of a mustache magic tag. And now when I refresh my page, I get the names of the to-do. I get the name of each to-do listed. I also want to add the completed state. So if this is completed, I want it to have that line through it that it showed before. So I need to add a completed class name. I can do that use the if helper, if completed, add completed. Otherwise, well, no otherwise. Only if it, basically this is again a mustache helper, this kind of defines a mustache section. Here's the content of that section. And the if helper, if this value is truthy, just inserts this section into the page. So refreshing now, I can see that walk the dog is now marked as completed. The next thing I want to add real quick is this items left number. I'm going to add a compute that calculates the number of items left and pass that to the template. So I'm going to do something like items left equals can.compute. And I'm just going to, canCompute is essentially a function that returns a value, but compute knows knows how to update when that value changes and will recalculate that value. So here I'm just going to create a counter that's going to start at 0 and go through the list of to-dos and increment counter every time a to-do is not completed. So it's going to go through each to-do, so to-dos.each, and for each to-do in the list, it's going to check if that to-do is not completed. And if it's not completed, we're going to increment the count. And then we're going to return that value as the count value as the value of the compute. So I'll send items left to the template, so we can use that to be, we can access items left, the items left compute, and put that in our template. And I'm going to put that here, where it says items left. So now, when I refresh the page, I can see there's 2 items left, and the awesome thing about live binding is that if I change, like, mow the lawn's completed state, if I do todos.atter, get the first items completed, and change it to true, you can see here the live binding takes care of not only updating the class name of this LI, it also changes items left. This is why observables are so important. You just kind of change the state of your page, and you've already put the rules for what, how the data of your page is reflected into the UI, into the visual aspect of what the user is looking at. And you just change the state or the data, and the page updates itself. So even if I were to remove a to-do, remove the last to-do, you can see here it removed the to-do automatically and updated the number of items left. That's kind of a nice thing about computes too, is they will recalculate every time. So that's nice, but we don't want to have a hard-coded list of to-dos. Instead, I'd prefer to have, I want to load to-dos from the server. So I'm going to create a to-do model. And actually I'm going to create that down here. By extending to-do model. And I'm going to give it a place to find all to-dos. And I'm going to say I want it to go to something get services to-dos. And instead of a hard-coded to-dos, I want to do to-do.findAll. So I want all to-dos on the server and provide some callback function that gets the list of to-dos. Now, the problem with this is that when I refresh the page, it's going to try to make a request to services to-dos, and I don't have a server set up. So what I need to do is simulate a server, and I'm going to use CanFixture to do that. So if I add, I'm going to add the CanFixture plugin and its dependency of CanObject. So I'm going to add CanObject.js, and I'm going to add CanFixture.js. And then I'm going to make sure it's working by doing can.fixture. And I got something there. That means we have CanFixture. To use CanFixture, to simulate this, this request right here, I'm going to write out CanFixture, what I want to simulate, and a function that returns the value that the server would be sending back. In this case, I'm going to have it send back an array of to-dos, and I'm going to give each to-do an ID, because model, if we're going to destroy these things on a hypothetical server, a simulated server, we would always be sending an ID back of the to-do to be destroyed. So I would send back, give each one of these an ID. And now, when I refresh my page, I get that same list of to-dos, but from a simulated service. Instead of using findAll, there's an alternative, easier way to get a list of to-dos from the server. Whenever a to-do model is defined, it also creates a to-do list. And you can create instances of to-do lists, and if you pass them an object, it's assumed that those are the same params that go to findAll. And what this does is it's going to return a list of to-do. It's going to return a to-do list, an empty to-do list, but it's going to go use findAll to retrieve items from the server and then insert those into to-dos. So I can just kind of go back to this old code and just have a list of to-dos here and have items left, or not have everything in a big callback, essentially. So if I refresh, just want to make sure that works. You'll see it works. But the interesting thing is, because we're rendering with an empty list at first, for a while there's going to be no list of to-dos. Then the fixture is going to return them, and then it's going to show to-dos. We can exaggerate that by doing can.fixture delay and then say it's like 2 seconds. Now you can see for 2 seconds there's no to-dos, and then they show up. Get rid of that. This items left, this is kind of silly. It'd be much nicer if, instead of having to kind of pass items left, maybe in the template we can just write todos.active count, right? Actually, a helper function on to-dos. I want to be able to create a helper functions on kind of this to-dos array. That's actually pretty easy to accomplish. When the default, we can just replace the default list type that's created by can model by extending the original one, by extending the default one with whatever helper functions we want. I'm going to add a filter helper function that I can use. I'm going to add a bunch of helper functions that I know we're going to use later. First one I'm going to add is a basic filter helper function. And what that does is take some check, essentially, function, and it's going to go through and create a new list for every item in the list that satisfies this check function. So I will do create a new list. I can do new to-do list, but better in case I want to change what to-do list is called, or I want to inherit from to-do list. It's actually a lot better to do this dot constructor. So whatever, this will be the model list instance. Constructor is going to point to whatever its constructor function is. So even if you're inheriting, this code will work. So I'm going to create a new empty list. I'm going to go through each item in the list. I'll call it to do. And I'll just say if check to do, if it returns true, we're going to add that to do to the list. And then we're going to return the list of to-dos. Next, I'm going to create an active helper that's just going to return a list of the active to-dos. So I'm just going to return this.filter, and this is going to get called with each to-do, and I want it to return the ones that are not completed. And then active count, that can just simply return this dot actives length property. Now I can remove items left and move items left here, and then if I go back to my page, you can see here that items left hopefully is working. Let me pop out from to-dos, to-do, and see if it updates. It updates, it works. Okay, so let's see what I did so far. Just to recap, I created a fixture that simulates serving a list of to-dos. I created a model that lets me retrieve those to-dos from my simulated server. I added some helper functions to a to-do list. So whenever I get a list of to-dos, I can have filter functions, an active function, and get an active count function. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new to-do list. I'm going to say, by passing it this object here, it knows to first return an empty list, but then in the background it will do an AJAX request for my list of to-dos and then put those in this initially empty list. I'm going to render that list, I'm going to render this template with that list and put it in the app. And this template is going to go through each item and add completed class name if that to-do is complete, and it's going to list its name, and we're also going to list the total number of to-dos. So cool. Now the next thing I want to show is how you can add some two-way binding. The first thing I want to two-way bind is the checkbox. So there's this new feature of CanJS where if you do can-sum or can-value, you can specify what property in the current scope you want to two-way bind to this input element. So this is the checkbox for whether the to-do is completed. So I want to two-way bind the completed property of each to-do to its input element, so that when the input element changes its value, it's going to update completed, and when completed changes, it's going to update the input's value. So we can see this in action. Refreshing. You can see here as I toggle this checkbox, the number of items left changes and the completed class changes. All by adding can value completed. There's also declarative event bindings. If I want to actually destroy a to-do when this button is clicked, I can use can event name, in this case click, equals the method that I want to call in the current scope. Models always have a destroy method model instances have a destroy method that when called tries to destroy that item on the server. If I put a destroy here and then click the destroy button for one of these to-dos, you can see here it's going to try to actually delete the to-do, but we haven't provided a fixture or told the model where to do and how to delete to-dos. So I'm going to fix that by first by adding a destroy method to my model, saying, hey, you destroy to-dos at delete. We're going to delete them from the server at services to-dos ID. And now that'll make a request here, but of course that request isn't going to work, so I'm going to update my fixture to do that, and delete, all it expects, all Can model expects from a delete request is that it's a successful request or successful response. And we can just simulate that really easy just by returning kind of essentially an empty object. Hey, no data was really sent back, but it was successful because it got some data back. Now when we delete these to-dos, they just get destroyed on the server and disappear. Now that might be confusing, that they actually go away. Why does that happen? There's a special property of model lists, like to-do list, that if an item inside the list is destroyed, it's automatically removed from the list. And because of live binding, it knows when an item is removed from our to-dos list that we passed it, it will automatically remove that item from that li from the page. So that's when I want to click here, it's just removed. So that's pretty nice that we get a lot of functionality just by saying, hey, clan click destroy, and if we give our model a tell it how to destroy items, then we get that rich behavior where you click this button, destroys it on the server, and removes it from the list. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is I want to be able to create to-dos. And I'm going to do that by using CanComponent. CanComponent allows you to add custom behavior to elements, to custom elements. So instead of this input element here, I want a to-dos create element. And if our designer puts that in, they can expect a input element would be added that allows them to create to-dos, some rich behavior. So I'm going to define a to-dos create widget. To-dos create component. So to do that, I will extend CanComponent. I'll give the tag name I want it to operate on, which is to-dos create, and I can give it a template for the content that I want inserted inside within to-dos create. So in this case, I want it to just put that original input element whenever it sees to-dos create. So I need to obviously make this a string here. Now if I reload my page, we get pretty much the same thing. There's this input element here, again. But what I want is when I hit the enter key, that's going to create a to-do on the server. I can make that happen by using another templated event, or in-template event handler. So I can say when someone hits enter, I want to call create to-do. Now there is no create to-do method passed to this template, right? So it's not like destroy where we can kind of look up a destroy method. Instead, we're going to create a create to-do method on the to-dos create component, its component scope. So there's this scope property that kind of defines the items added to the scope of to-dos create, kind of added within the mustache template. Everything within here is available within this template here. So I can create a create to-do method that will be called by this CanEnter hookup, if you will. And what I want to do here is create a new to-do with a completed is false and a name property. When a method here, like a template event handler, is set up, it calls that event handler with the context of the template, which is really just this scope object that's created here. If I do this is equal to context. In this case, it's called the context, the element, and the event. And this element is the element this enter event happened on, and it's a jQuery element, so I can just call val to get the current value. And then I want to save this to the server, and I want to save that to the server, and I want to set back element's value to just an empty string. So you can kind of type something, hit enter, it gets cleared. You can type something again, hit enter, and it gets cleared. And I'll probably I only want to do this if there is a value in L.value. I only want to do all of this if you actually hit enter while there's something. Now if I save this and refresh, and I type understand can.model, hit enter, nothing happens. And nothing happens, of course, because we haven't defined how this model creates to-dos. So I'm going to add a create method that's going to post to services to-dos. And I'm going to add a fixture, but I'm going to clean up my fixtures so they're a little bit more organized here. I'm going to instead pass one object with all my fixtures listed instead of calling can fixture over and over again. And I will call post. I will create a fixture for when you post to my to-dos service. And this, I want to return what create expects, CanModel's create method expects. It expects a successful response that provides the ID of the newly created to-do. So in this case, I'm just going to kind of do a hack where I say, hey, the ID is just some random ID. A better fixture might actually add that to-do to some array and then delete would remove it, so that if I were to call find all again, it would be in this kind of fixture. But it's not necessary for this example because you're never calling find all. You're never hitting this service more than once. So I'm also going to leave a little warning saying, hey, you just created a to-do. So we can see it's actually creating something even though we're not doing anything with the newly created to-do. So if I refresh, can.model, learn can.model, hit enter, you just created to-do. The next thing we need to do is create that to-do list that knows when the to-do is created and insert that to-do into the to-do list. For that, I'm going to replace this UL with a to-dos list element. Then this will be controlled by can component. And similar to how I did to-dos create, I'm going to extend can component. Its tag is to-dos list. And its template, I don't want to write out this string within, like, as a string. I don't want to write out this template as a string, right? It'd be kind of messy listed here. So instead, I can either put this in a file, or in this case, I'll put it as another mustache script tag. Its ID will be to-dos list template. and I will write out the same contents as before. For the to-do list component, instead of providing a string template, I can pass it the result of calling CanView with the ID of a template. This returns a renderer, essentially a function that represents a template that can be called to render the template described here. Now when I refresh, it still works. You might be wondering, how does this template here know about, this template? How does it get to-dos? Well, a component has access to, and a component's template has access to anything in its kind of parent scope, including what you've rendered the template with. Okay, so I want to make my to-dos list able to edit the to-dos passed to it. I want to make my to-dos list able to edit a to-dos name. So I'm going to, on label, add when someone clicks the label, I want to update the to-do's name, edit the to-do. So I'm going to say can click edit to-do. And this edit to-do method, I'm going to set an edit property. Well, first I'm going to add edit to-do list scope. And this is going to get called with the context of the element that's calling edit to do. And in this case, the context of this label is the actual to-do that was used to render this section. So this function is actually called back with the to-do we want to be editing, or set up to be editing. I'm just going to simply add a editing class. I'm just set its editing property to true when you click edit to do, and I'm going to change the template so that if the to do is being edited, we're going to add that editing class. So now when I click the label, it should call edit to do, which should show the to do being, allow you to edit the to do. You'll notice it says do the dishes. That's because I need to change the value here to show the name of the to do, not the hard-coded do the dishes. But even though when I've changed that, I can change it, but it doesn't actually edit it. I could use two-way binding to associate the value of this input element to the value of the to-do's name, but two-way binding won't save it to the server, and it won't save it to the server by default, and it will not remove the editing property so that this disappears. Instead, I'm going to make it so when someone hits the enter key or blurs, it's going to call update to do. So I'm going to make a can blur call update to do and a can enter call update to do. And I spelled update wrong, so I'll change that. I'll add a update to do method to my to-dos list. And this is going to need to do three things. It's going to need to remove the editing property, update the to-do's name property, and save the to-do. So I'll do all three of those things. update its name to the element's value, and then save that to-do to the server. Of course, we need to update our to-do model to be able to update to-dos. So we'll have it put to services to-dos, and followed by the ID of the to-do it's trying to update. Similar to delete, our fixtured update service can simply return an empty object, signaling a successful update. And I'll give us a little warning. You updated a to-do on the server. So now I will refresh, and I should be able to mow lawn, please. And I updated a to-do on the server. So real quick, what I just did there for editing, again, is I added a, when you click the to-dos label, it calls edit to-do, and that adds a editing property. That adds a editing property on the to-do. And by adding the editing property, it adds this editing class, which will show this input element. And then if you either blur or hit the enter key on this input element, it's going to call update to-do. And update to-do removes the editing property, updates the to-do's name, and saves the to-do to the server. The next thing I'm going to do is make the application to-do's app component. And the to-do's app component is going to put the to-do's list and the to-do's create together. It's also going to load the list of to-do's. A lot of times an application component just kind of sits on top of all the other components. So I'll create to-do's app at the beginning and end. Just kind of outline our entire page here. And I'll define a to-do's app component that's going to add to-do's to the scope. So here I'll do can component. I'll give it a tag of to-do's app. And I will give it a scope that will include the to-dos list. Now I just need to render the template. And we should have the same thing. What I want to-dos app to do is, since it's putting together the list, it's kind of getting the list for the, to-dos list widget. I want it to listen to whenever a to-dos is created and insert that newly created to-do into its list, which essentially is the same list that to-dos list is listing on. And yes, my apologies for all the to-dos lists and things like that. It can be confusing, but bear with me. I want this app to do this component to listen to anytime a new to-do is created and add it to this list of to-dos that the to-do list component is using in its template. To do that, I'm going to add an events object, and using CanControl's templated, kind of CanControl-like templated binding, I can listen anytime a to-do is created. Whenever a to-do is created, this is going to get called back with the actual to-do model, the event, and the newly created to-do. I can add that to-do to my list, my to-dos list in the scope. So I will do this.scope, and I will get its list of to-dos, and I will push the new to-do. Now when I create a new to-do, it gets added. It's going to get saved to the server and added to the end of the list. The nice thing about listening to events in this way is that they automatically get torn down if To-Dos app is ever removed from the page. Now, the next thing that I want to happen is I want the routing buttons to work. I want to be able to click active and completed and have it actually filter this list and do what's right. To make that happen, you first maybe need to understand a little bit about CanRoute. Once you've set up all your pretty routes, you call CanRoute ready. We're not going to be setting up pretty routes at first. But that sets up a two-way binding between CanRoute, which is a CanObserve, or it's like a CanMap, and the hash. So if I were to add, let's say, a filter property to CanRoute and say I want to filter active, that changes the hash up here. If I set that to completed, it'll change the hash to completed. If I click the back button though, and then read the filter property, it's now active. So CanRoute is two-way bound to the hash here. If the hash changes, it updates the properties here. If the properties in CanRoute get updated, it updates the hash. With that in mind, based on CanRoute's filter property, I want to provide the list a different list, the to-dos list component, a different list of to-dos to be shown here. So if CanRoute's filter is active, I only want to be passing the to-do list component the active to-dos to show. So on the scope here, I'm going to make a to-dos to show, or I'm actually going to call it displayed to-dos helper method. And based on what CanRoute is, it's going to return a different set of to-dos, this function. So I'm going to first get the filter value, can.route. I'm going to get my list of to-dos. And then, for example, if a filter is active, I want this to return the active to-dos. Now you'll remember I created an active helper function on to-dos list that returns only the active to-dos. I'm going to create a similar one that returns only the completed to-dos of the list. So I'll remove that not. This is going to return only the ones that have completed true. We'll call this completed. So I'll also change this so otherwise, if filter is completed, I want to return completed to-dos. And finally, if filter is not active or completed, I just want to return the full list of to-dos. Now I want the to-dos list. I want the to-dos in to-dos list, instead of being the to-dos in the to-dos list component, instead of being the list of all to-dos, I want it to be listing what the result of displayed to-dos is. I can change to-dos inside what the value of to-dos inside to-dos list is by setting an attribute on to-dos list. So if I want its value of to-dos to be something else, I can, in the scope, I can set it what I want it to be equal to. In this case, I want to-dos list's to-dos value to be displayed to-dos that comes from to-dos app. Yes, the naming of to-dos everywhere makes this rather confusing, and my apologies for that, but it's not, this is like passing an argument. It's pretty simple. I want to alias to-dos inside to-dos list to this display to-dos function. So once I've done that, and I'm going to turn routing on by calling can.route.ready. Once I've done that, if I refresh my page, you can see it's already showing the active ones. If I change the hash up here to completed, it shows the completed ones, and if I remove everything in the hash, it shows everything. But these links aren't going to work because they're kind of hard-coded in links, and we need them to change this kind of which li is actually which one you're showing. We need this kind of selected property to be added to the element as well. To do that, I'm going to change in my template here. Instead of kind of hard-coding these links, I want to make a link helper function. I'm going to call that filter link. And it's going to be passed the text inside the link and the what I want to set CanRoute's filter property to. When you're in all, I don't want to be filtering by anything, so I'm going to set CanRoute's filter property to undefined. You might be wondering why I have the triple mustache here, triple curly braces. It's because this filter link is going to return HTML, and we don't want it escaped. And it's also going to handle this class equals selected. Right? It's going to add selected if the CanRoute's filter property, it matches kind of what the second argument is. That what means this link is selected. So I'm going to replace all of these hard-coded links with this helper, and then I'm going to implement the helper. So I want active, and I want to set CanRoute's filter property to active. And I want this one to be completed, and I want CanRoute's filter property to be completed. Now I'll implement filter link as a helper inside my to-dos app. So this object is a object of helper functions that are local with inside to-dos app, with inside its kind of content. So I want a filter link helper that's going to be called with the text of the link and what we want filter's value to be. And this is going to make use of can.route.link. Can.route.link is a helper function that creates links, links so that when they clicked on, they set CanRoute's properties to be, you know, what you expect them to be. So if I wanted, for example, a active link that when clicked on is going to make CanRoute's properties look like this object here. In this case, I'd want active, or I want filter to be active. Right? I want to set, this is what the object I want CanRoute to look like. I want it to have a filter property that is active. And I can also add another option. There's a third option, which is any properties you want to set on the link that you're creating, any attributes. So I might want class name, its class name to be selected, right? If it was currently selected, filter. So using the arguments here, I'm going to pass the correct thing to CanRoute. So the text is easy. I just kind of forward the text. To get the object here, what I want this object, when you click on this link, this object to look like, I'm going to create an attrs object of can.route. And I'm going to, if there's a filter value, I'm going to set attrs filter to point to the filter value. And I'm just going to pass attrs here. And then finally for this class name, we only want selected if currently can.route's filter property equals the filter value here. So I'll do something like if can.route's filter property equals the filter value, if it does, then we want selected, otherwise we just want an empty string. So again, what this is doing is it's setting attributes is going to be the properties we want this link to set on can.route when clicked on, and we also want class name to only be selected if the current filter value is if the current filter property of can.route is the filter value passed in. So if we passed in active, only when filter is active do we want this link to be selected. Now, having done that, if I refresh, when I click these links, it just works. You can see the bolding works and the back and forth button works, how you would expect it to work. This is really powerful. A lot of times people are confused how this is working exactly. Basically, if anything goes to a template, it's automatically converted to compute for you, right? So this function here, because it's referenced in the template, it's going to read this function and say, hey, this function is reading some observable. It's reading some observable properties. It's reading this kind of to-dos attribute, and it's also reading on can.route's filter property. And if any of those change, recalculate display to-dos and update what to-dos in the scope of the to-dos list is. So it'll update to-dos list to-dos anytime kind of the filter changes or anything changes here. The filter link helper is doing the same thing. It's listening to anytime the filter property changes and updating. It's kind of rerunning here and recreating a new link every time, because the link will have a different class name. So that's why this works, and it's almost, to me, like magic. I want, instead of these ugly routes where it's like filter equals active, I just want it to be pretty, like what it was supposed to be, where it's just has active after this, and this means filter only show the active ones, and if it's complete, it means show only the completed ones. I can add a pretty route. You can add pretty routes before calling can.route.ready by calling can.route with what you want your pretty route to be. In this case, anything after the hash bang, that is going to be the value of filter. That's what I want. Refreshing now. It's going to show active, and now these links work how we expect them to. A big strength of CanJS is that your controls and widgets really are just looking at properties on can.route and setting properties on can.route. They don't need to know the rules of your pretty routes. And that makes it so they can be much more maintainable, and you can change routes independent of everything else. So there's a few bits more functionality, but I'm not gonna finish all of it. I just want to show how to implement, clear completed and the toggle all. You can hopefully figure out how to make work yourselves. I just want to show adding this items left helper, kind of the hello world of mustache helpers, how to do pluralization. I'm going to add, I want to change in my template where is my clear? Oh, well here, by the way, I'm going to add I'll just really quickly add a todos.completed count. And here, instead of items left, I want a plural helper, which is going to call plural. I'm going to put this on a new line. It's going to call plural, and it's going to give, hey, I want the plural of item if essentially active count is 0 or 2 or greater. So first I'm going to add the completed count, and then I'm going to come back to implement plural. So completed count is going to work just like active count. I'm just going to return the completed's length. Pretty simple. And then I'm going to add the helper plural. And what that's going to do is it's going to take the singular word that we want to pluralize and also a count. Now, if something is, in this case, in our template, in this case, oh, this should be marked as a string. In this case, to use that active count, how many items are left, that is a kind of a live value. It's not going to be passed as a number to the plural helper. It's going to be passed as a compute. Count is going to be an actual compute. So to get the actual value, we need to call count like you would normally call a function, but you call a compute too to get its value. So here what we'll do is if value is 0, or just basically if value is 1, we're just going to return singular. Otherwise, we're going to return, in this case, singular plus s. And now we'll refresh. It says there's 2 items left because there are. Now the items works perfectly. So hopefully the last hour has been helpful. It gave you a good, it was hopefully illustrative of how much power the new CanJS 2.0 has and how relatively quickly you can add a tremendous amount of functionality with can component, things like two-way binding, the declarative in-template event bindings, but you still get a lot of the good old 1.1 stuff like can route, computes, observables, things like that. So thank you.